Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Seth, clinical psychologist, Dr. Seth Meyers, and I'm going to talk a little bit today in this video about coping with loss, about grief and what the experience is like, and how to get through it as well as possible. So, I know that millions of people deal with a sense of grief because they've lost something at some point in their lifetime. And in fact, the same person may experience different sorts of losses over many different years. You may have the loss of a pet, the loss of another loved one, the loss of something you really wanted, the loss of a relationship. There are many different types of loss a person can feel. Some of the most painful losses, of course, involve people or relationships where we depended emotionally on a person, and all of a sudden we're forced to cope without that sense of love, affection, and attachment. What does grief look like? Well, grief has no playbook. There is no recipe or no perfect template for what grief looks like, how a person copes with loss when they are dealing with that. People can go through all sorts of different emotional reactions when they've lost something, and that could include incredible sadness, inconsolable crying. It could include sort of emotionally shutting down, feeling numb, or as if your emotions are frozen. It could include irritability, anger. It can include a whole range of negative emotions. And then, of course, it can also include sometimes a sense of denial, just outright trying to believe that the loss didn't happen. It often also goes along with self medicating with alcohol or drugs. The feelings are so intense or uncomfortable that a person may try to use alcohol or drugs to try to dull those feelings and change their reality. Why? Because the reality they're dealing with is so incredibly painful and uncomfortable. In this video, I'll share a few examples of things that you can do to try to help yourself cope. But I want to make sure, first of all, that we capture the essence of what grief is and what it feels like when a person loses someone or something that they really care about. Here's what's interesting about grief. A lot of times, words can be so good and effective at making us feel certain ways or helping us understand something. Think about the first time, maybe in a romantic relationship, someone said the words to you, I love you. Or in a current relationship you have now, it could be a child, a sibling, a close friend. When they say those words, I love you, how it makes you feel. Sometimes words can be incredibly effective. In addition, sometimes words can be incredibly effective in how they make you feel badly. You may remember things that were hurtful or critical or even cruel that someone said. Those words were really effective in causing you to feel something. Well, here's the thing. When you are going through grief, when you have lost something that you really cared about, another person's words can only go so far. In fact, if someone were to ask you when you are in the thick of coping with grief, how you feel, what the feelings are, a lot of times you may feel like there aren't words. I can't even find the words to describe how I feel. No words can do justice to just how complex and messy and painful the whole mix of negative feelings are when you feel grief. So I just want to share that reminder. Don't feel a pressure to find the perfect words. Don't feel the pressure to try to explain to anyone else exactly how it feels in a perfect way, because a lot of times it can take a period of time for you to sift through all the different feelings, even the memories, and make sense of it to even know how you feel. I think about it like this. When you think about dealing with a really profound loss and you are going through grief, picture a kitchen table with nothing on it, and then dump out all the feelings, all the memories, all the thoughts that you have about what you lost, the person, the pet, it could be the relationship. Put all those things on the table. And what grief is, what you are going to be doing is sifting through everything on that table piece by piece, taking something out, turning it over, maybe moving it aside. All of a sudden, you see something else. You look at that, open it up, look at it, remember it, set it down, put that aside. Look at the next thing. It is sifting through so much. And a lot of times, when you feel deep grief, when you feel a deep sense of loss, you are grieving something that you had in your life for many, many years. So, what does that mean? There are a lot of memories. There are a lot of memories. There are a lot of thoughts. The feeling is deep like the ocean. And you know what? At the bottom of the ocean, it's black. There's not even color. So it is sifting through what is a really complicated mess of feelings and just trying to get through the day. In fact, just trying to get through the moments. When you're going through a deep sense of loss, seeking out resources to help you cope is incredibly important. And a video like this on coping with grief is an example of something that you may be doing right now to try to help you cope, seeking out resources. This is under the heading of psychoeducation, getting educated about thoughts and feelings so that we can understand our own emotional experiences better. And there is a lot of psychoeducation that you can do. There are books on grief, there are videos on grief that you can watch, and that is an incredibly important part of the healing that you can do. In my career as a psychologist, I have studied grief and the coping mechanisms that one can engage in to try to deal with grief as well as possible. But I want to share one of the most helpful things I have ever come across is an interview where someone was interviewed and talked about their own experience with grief. And I want to just share a little bit of information about that. So I'm talking about an interview with someone named Madonna Badger, and she was interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. Now, before I begin, I want to make a point that it's really important to not rank people's experiences with loss and grief. So there's not a contest. It's not that one person had it so much easier than another. If someone is going through grief, if someone has lost something they really cared about, it can be incredibly painful for that person. And though someone else may going through though someone else may be going through grief for an entirely different set of reasons, they too feel incredibly overwhelmed and often as if they just feel like they can't go on. The emotional struggle is that painful. A lot of times, people can understand and recognize in another person's grief experience what they themselves felt similar. They can feel like, oh my gosh, somebody else really understands. And then sometimes other people experience grief because of circumstances that not a lot of people can relate to. And this really speaks to Madonna Badger's case. So, Madonna Badger is someone who lost her three daughters and her two elderly parents, all of whom were staying in the same home in Connecticut. And they all perished except for Madonna Badger and her boyfriend in a house fire. The entire house caught flames. And unfortunately, the three young girls and the two elderly parents were not able to get out. This story, because it was so unusual, attracted a lot of news attention. And later, Madonna Badger was interviewed by Oprah Winfrey about the experience. Now, many of you listening may think, I can't really imagine what that feels like to lose my whole family. I can't imagine just how painful that must be. I know that people may think things like, how could one continue to go on? How could one find the will to live? And so, in this interview, one of the questions that Oprah Winfrey asked Madonna Badger was to the effect of, in retrospect, dealing with something so painful, what lessons do you think you learned? What lessons did you learn from this experience? And Madonna Badger thought about it, paused, and replied and said, I don't know. I don't know. That was one of the most powerful moments that I have ever heard in my life, even as a psychologist, talking about emotional issues. That Madonna Badger was talking about going through this experience. And a lot of times when we hear about people that go through things like this, the natural inclination is to want to believe that the person did see some lessons, that they did uncover some truths. And yet, what we saw, I believe, in that interview when Madonna Badger answered was just how incredibly difficult and complex and confusing the experience of grief really is. Sometimes people want to believe that everything happens for a reason or that I can learn lessons from everything. But sometimes things are so complex and so overwhelming and so painful that you may not actually be able to even know or be able to conjure what the lessons are, what the reasons are that you can learn from a tragedy. And you know what? Maybe you don't have to pressure yourself when you are going through some sort of grief reaction, when you have experienced a tragedy or extremely painful loss. You don't need to pressure yourself to come up with the lessons. Maybe there are lessons, maybe sometimes there are not lessons. Maybe all we can do when we experience an extremely painful loss is to keep going, to keep going, to keep on moving. And how do we do that? We do that with a mix. On the one hand, letting ourselves feel the feelings, the sadness, the anger, the loss. Sometimes it's the numbness, even the anger, the irritation, the bitterness, the emotional bitterness when we have lost something that we cared about and wanted. So it's a mix of letting yourself feel that and at the same time reminding yourself that we do need to go on and that little by little, step by step, we do need to do some of the simplest things as soon as we feel well enough, like take a shower, make the bed, clean the kitchen, call a friend, write in a journal. Sometimes it is the combination of all those millions of little things we do that can help us one day start to feel better. So that one day we wake up and we say, I think I feel 1 ounce better just for this moment. Or maybe today I feel just 2% better than I did when I woke up yesterday. Am I happy? No. Am I dealing with this well? I'm afraid I'm not. But can I find some progress, some improvement? And the truth is, when you're really coping with deep loss, there may be a few days in a row when you don't notice any change. But you can put your finger on your pulse, on your wrist, and say, but I am here. You can say, I am breathing right now. I am doing what I can. I will make one phone call today. I will text my brother. I will call my sister. I will remind myself that I am here now and I am doing my best to cope. In my life, I have experienced a significant loss. And until that loss, I had never felt this type of sadness and hopelessness, really, this type of despair before. I have never felt helpless in that way and hopeless in that way. And I was overwhelmed in a way that I just simply hadn't experienced before. And I really didn't know how I would get through it. I think one of the things that I did is I told myself that I need people. And actually, the research shows that social support is one of the most important factors that can help a person get through grief and loss. Social support, a sense of connection. And I am living proof of that because that is something that I did. I turned to people in my life for emotional support when I was dealing with profound loss. I also did a lot of other things too. I wrote in a journal I wrote poems. I told myself sometimes just do the dishes in the sink, just vacuum the rug, engage in productive tasks. A few days into my coping, I got back to exercising again. Now, those few days in the immediate aftermath, it felt like nothing really helped. It really felt like nothing helped at the time. But after a while, I started waking up and feeling 1 or 2% better. I forced myself to do things like go for short walks in the middle of the day and just feel the sunshine. I did a lot of walks in parks, in nature, and looked at the trees and saw around me all the things that were still alive, that were still vibrant, even though I lost that sense myself because of the loss that I was dealing with. And again, one day, I just started feeling a little bit better. And each day from that point started getting a little bit better. And yes, I had my moments where I would get stuck again in that sadness and that sense of loss. But like a wave, I waited for the wave to wash through me. I waited for it to pass, and I could regain a little sense of emotional balance again and hope. Just watching myself go through my own sense of sadness and loss, I started to regain that sense that things do keep going, that life does go on. What's interesting is I remember a conversation that I had with my mother about this whole experience. And I told her, I realized, Mom, at the end of the day, we are wired for survival. We are wired for survival. Even if a part of me just wanted to give up and say, I can't do it anymore, I can't cope with the sadness, it's too big for me. Well, I'm wired. I am wired for survival. Think about the human being and how strong and how sophisticated our brains are and our bodies are, the physical and emotional skills that we are capable of as human beings. How many years the human being has survived on this earth. And I realized, although I went through a sense of grief and loss in something that happened in my personal life, that I was wired for survival, that I would survive, that there was something in me that would help kick in and help me keep going, even when I sometimes felt like giving up. And so I want to share that with you all. For anyone watching who is going through any kind of grief themselves or experienced a loss, small or big, that is making them feel sad and despair or overwhelmed or even numb, I want you to know that there are people in this world that can understand. In fact, most people, if not everyone, experiences some type of grief in their lifetime. I do believe that everyone experiences loss sooner or later. And most of us, we experience many different kinds of loss over the course of our lives. But I want you to know that you are wired for survival, that you can get through this, that talking to people is critical. Social support will make an enormous difference for you. And in particular, social support that you may be able to access where you could talk to others who have gone through loss themselves. If you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, for example, talk especially to someone who lost someone that you know was important to them, and ask them, how did you do it? How long did it take? Do you have any advice? Let them know how you're feeling. Why? Because they can understand. One of the things that works against coping well with grief is isolation. So the more a person isolates themselves, the more poorly they will cope with their grief. So do the opposite and get connected and connect yourself with people who have experienced loss, people who know you, people that you can get ideas from about how you can get better with your own circumstances and start to get back that sense of hope. Now, there are also important professionals that you can consult. If it would be helpful for you, my recommendation is to talk to a mental health therapist. That therapist can really help walk you through the different stages of grief, from anger to sadness to bargaining to all sorts of emotional reactions as you try to accept this new reality. So, a mental health professional can be critical and so positive in dealing with this experience. But a mental health professional isn't the only person. If you are a spiritual or religious person, there are people that you can contact in your local community. You can talk to people who are in helping professions who will walk you through this process, who will listen to you, and just being listened to, feeling like someone else understands. These are really helpful experiences. And then finally, the last note that I would make is nature. Being in nature can be incredibly helpful. And research shows that exercise in nature, even if it's mild exercise, can really help a person's mental health. And you know what? If you're overwhelmed with grief, your mental health needs you more than ever to try to find different things to help you deal with this. Now, I talked a little earlier about my own experience with grief and loss. If someone were to ask me what helped me most out of all the different things that I tried and I did to try to get through it, I don't know exactly what the most helpful thing was. I know that I did so many different things, and that the whole mix of all those things I did, I think, is what helped. It was the mix. It was the 20, 25 different things that I did to try to cope. And that mix created the magic I needed to help me keep going. I don't know if it was just one magic thing that I did. I think that it was all of those things together, harnessing all those different things together, created a power in me that said, you know what? I can go on. And I just want you all to know, if you're dealing with grief and loss now, you can too. I wish you all the best as you cope with the circumstances that you're dealing with now.